Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Invention Mode podcast. I'm Tanya Kohen, and this is the space where we explore how corporate professionals embrace the invention mindset and rethink their roles and reframe how work gets done, often through small, clever fixes that spark meaningful change and move organizations forward. Together with my guests, we'll look at what it takes to build a culture where new ideas can take root and how that capability keeps companies competitive and future ready. For a long time, Treasury was viewed as a control function. It ensured liquidity, maintained banking relationships, and helped organizations operate safely within financial constraints. But if you look at what Treasury leaders are dealing with today, the picture is very different. Treasury now sits at the intersection of risk, technology, liquidity strategy, operational finance, and external financial systems. In many organizations, it's becoming something closer to a coordination layer, a function that connects decisions and information across the enterprise. And that raises an interesting question. If Treasury's role is expanding this much, are most Treasury teams actually designed for the job they are now expected to do? To explore that, I'm joined by Justin Guerra, Senior Vice President at Kaufman Hall's Treasury and Capital Markets practice. Today, we talk about what's really changing inside the Treasury, what organizations may be underestimating, and how leaders can intentionally design the next version of the function.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and a lot of pertinent topics that, I know I'm talking about every single day. So I'm sure across industries and corporate treasury, across banks, across consulting firms, this is very pertinent in what we're talking about every single day. So thank you for having me.
Justin, thank you for joining me today. A few words about your background. Justin Guerra is a Senior Vice President with Kaufman Hall, a Vision company. Justin is a member of the firm's Treasury and Capital Markets practice. He provides analytical, quantitative, and strategic support to nationwide non-for-profit hospitals and healthcare systems, focusing on innovative treasury solutions built for sustainable growth. Prior to joining Kaufman Hall, Justin served as a Vice President and Treasury Management Officer on the Corporate Client Banking and Specialized Industries team for JPMorgan Chase. In this role, Justin was responsible for managing Fortune 1000 portfolios, managing a team of Treasury sales associates, and driving business development. Justin, thanks for joining the podcast. And I'd say let's jump right into it and talk about Treasury. And let's start with the discussion. If we step back and compare Treasury today to what it looked like 10 or 15 years ago, what's the most fundamental shift you are observing and in how organizations expect to operate today?
I started my career in treasury and cash management a little over a decade ago. And I started on the banking side at JPMorgan Chase. So the huge bank that has the whole suite of offerings. And it's funny, when I joined, the people that I was learning from spoke about how the treasury space had not changed for decades. Checks were still around and prevalent, and paper kind of flooded the industry on the payout and the collection side. I feel now, 10 years later, everything has changed. And the change in the development in the last decade has been exponential. At least that's my perception, to the decades prior. And so, I think a lot of the change that we've seen, it's not just in the banking landscape, it's not just in the corporate treasury landscape. It was started with the consumer. And I think the shift in the eyes of the consumer, the demands of the consumer, is where it all starts. Like, you think about you and me as individuals. We want things now. We want them fast, with ease of purchasing them, a single click, a single button. I want to be able to compare price over here to price over here, quality and product over here to product over here. And so consumer demands shift, and that trickles downstream. So banking solutions have to shift to accommodate these requirements for real time, frictionless payments, ease of purchasing and comparison. You go downstream from the banking institutions who create the solutions to enable that, and then you have the corporates that have to adopt and enable this technology to bring that to their consumers. You think of an Amazon, right? As a consumer, I want to click and I want to, buy stuff right now. there needs to be a banking solution to connect me, the consumer, to purchasing the solution. And so the corporate Amazon in that example needs to be able to integrate that banking capability into their solutions. Treasury and technology need to speak the same language to weather this paradigm shift from just reconciling yesterday as a cost center to steering tomorrow and being the strategic leader for the organization. And so corporate treasury teams are starting to integrate this real time and right time visibility and automation and improved financial decision making into their day-to-day processes through their banking relationships, their ERPs, their treasury systems. I love that conversation around treasury historically being this cost center because it's true when you fast forward a decade and beyond ago. But now there's this shift towards treasury becoming this enabler and this value generator for the organization, bringing tangible bottom line benefit back to the organization to the tune of seven figures plus, right? So um, I'm the biggest cheerleader for Treasury. I think Treasury is so uniquely positioned within an organization to your point, Tanya, building bridges to critical operations groups, being the conduit and the bridge to external partners. Treasury is managing external relationships with banks, with technology providers, with third parties, not really other groups. Other groups might have a hand and they might forge a one-off relationship, but Treasury should be the home to these relationships with these external parties. And so the organizations that have adopted technology as an enabler have captured the most value for their organizations in the midst of these consumer shifts and banking landscape shifts.
Oh wow, yeah, I love this. That's a great way to look at Treasury, and we've been talking about Treasury becoming this strategic, well, not becoming, but actually proving, I guess, especially internally in some organizations, proving to be the strategic partner. And we've been talking about this for quite a number of years, over a decade for sure. But I think now it's finally when we are enabled with technology even more so as we used to be in the past because the developments are so fast now. And we'll talk about the newer developments later as well. But I think now just is the time where everything can be brought together and when finally, Treasury can participate in so many activities as it should throughout the organization and add this value. So yeah, very much agree with you. Well, many treasuries, because of this and because of overall the way the markets are developing, many treasury teams feel that their scope is expanding. So risk oversight, technology decisions, working capital strategy, bank relationships. So at what point does the expansion stop being just more responsibilities and start becoming a different operating model for treasury focused on shaping how value flows through the business?
That's so true, right? Do more with less. I mean,
Yeah.
that's almost every
That's
industry
our
and
talk.
every individual kind of feels that pressure. But I mean, this theme resonates with conversations I'm having with corporate treasury leaders every single day. Treasury is historically this thinly staffed function within an organization, yet it becomes this catch-all bucket for all things finance that no one else wants to do, right? A sheetman of unclaimed checks, every flavor of reporting. And so you think about the list of responsibilities that a corporate treasury team takes on, and it's vast, it's expansive. Cash and liquidity management, get the cash to where it needs to be, managing banking relationships, like I mentioned, external third party relationships, executing payments, working capital optimization, coming in, what are we doing with it? And then how does it go out? Investments, debt, risk management, compliance, governance, forecasting. Oh, yeah. Then, if you have time, strategic projects, right? And the things that are going to bring value, like, you know, a competitive banking RFP or deploying a new piece of technology. That's the strategic stuff that gets shoved to the side because we have all of this tactical stuff we need to manage daily. Um, I think many organizations add responsibilities without appropriately defining the Treasury function. And this sounds, you know, very fundamental and rudimentary, but it's so critical. So, to me, I think it fundamentally starts with one, defining the responsibilities of the Treasury function appropriately. So many organizations that, we step into are performing accounting functions within the treasury as a function, or other finance functions that should sit with a different FP&A group or another group. And so I think that first step is defining the responsibilities that are treasury and are not treasury, what is, what isn't, to align ownership of tasks appropriately. I think once you do that, you can start to build policies and procedures and governance around what should those tasks look like on a day-to-day basis. How do we perform this task every single day? And it's only once you've done this where you could start to evaluate each task and look at how insightful or valuable this task is to the organization and compare that against how manual or automated the task is. And so I have an illustration that I want to pull up that I think will be super helpful in kind of, the framework, a way to think about performing this exercise. So I'm going to pull this page up if I can. And so, you think about breaking this down a little bit. So, first, evaluating how insightful or valuable a treasury task is. That's the y axis here. It asks simple questions, right? Does this task generate financial value for my organization? If not, the next question asks, okay, if it's not generating financial value, is this task mitigating risk for my organization? Is it protecting my organization from fraud? Um, if no to that question as well, am I at least providing critical data and information to key constituents and other pieces of the organization? If not, it's not bringing financial value, it's not mitigating risk, it's not providing critical data and information. Maybe it's important to ask, is that task even required? But say these are all required tasks. They're mitigating risk, driving value, providing critical data. The next thing to evaluate against that task is how manual or automated is this task today? In order to navigate through that thought track, you got to ask yourself, how long does this task take? How many FTE, how many individuals are performing this task? And what is the, frequency at which we're performing this task? If we fall to the left side of this illustration and even the bottom left quadrant, it's a highly manual task that isn't bringing a lot of value to the organization, but it checked yes on one of those questions. And so it's a task that needs to, we need to prolong that task. We need to continue to perform that task. If we're on the left side of this illustration, it's very manual, but we're on the top left quadrant using cash forecasting as an example in the illustration. If it's very manual today, but it's driving insights and bringing value to the organization, providing critical data and information, we should start to think about how we automate that task. And that task is a great task that is a candidate for automation or integration of technology to help alleviate the manual nature, how burdensome that task is. Um, so I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it's an awesome framework for defining the tasks that are treasury and are not, documenting those tasks, making them a part of our procedures, our tactical functions day to day, and then starting to put each task under a microscope and looking at, is this driving significant value for us or not, against how manual or automated is this task? And this is a great framework for building and establishing a treasury organization so that you're not just absorbing more responsibilities and you're being really thoughtful and critical around what are our responsibilities each day and how are we performing them. This is a great baselining exercise to define the tasks that could be, um, you know, in that consideration for technology adoption tomorrow.
It is a great framework. Yes, thank you for sharing this. And I, even from speaking, at conferences, every time I start talking about treasury processes and how, and different frameworks that you can put in place to um, kind of map out the either the automation as you just shared in this example, which I think is really great, or just the way you think about getting tasks done. Every time I talk about process, there's a lot of excitement about it. Well, odd to say, but there is, because treasury teams understand their tasks and their processes and what's involved and how many hours are involved, which systems are involved, and what it takes to actually get something done, something that you can put into words like cash forecast. Okay, behind this, there's a huge process and many people involved, different departments and all. So yeah, it's very helpful to think about automation from this point of view as well. I agree with you very much, and especially when when you combine what's manual versus automated and the value, in each of these, where on the spectrum this task is in terms of the value it brings to the organization. That's the key here. So, in our conversation with you, we could talk about many things, and there's great thought leadership behind this. But I feel that we often come back to the topic of working capital management as one of the very valuable things that sometimes doesn't get enough attention in some organizations, and sometimes doesn't reside with treasury departments. So just wanted to maybe touch on that and talk about working capital optimization and how it kind of, I think it used to sit mainly with finance or operations um, in the past, especially. But Treasury should probably stay closer, at least in my view, should stay closer to this, because to the tasks related to working capital, because of cash optimization, because of banking relationships that Treasury has. So where do you see Treasury creating the most impact today when it comes to connecting working capital decisions with liquidity strategy?
Yeah, you said it. I think Treasury should absolutely stay closer to strategic initiatives that are centered around working capital optimization. We hit it a little. Treasury's the enterprise's steward of cash, right? Seeing to it that cash is directed appropriately to maximize value. And as the owner of the relationships that connect our organization to banking tools, critical systems in our technical architecture, third party relationships, fintechs that bring solutions to us, treasury is at the center of this hub and spoke engine that powers and propels the organization forward. So it's through partnership with core functional groups that treasury charts the path for strategic initiatives to advance organizational objectives. We spent some time the prior dialogue today talking about a lot of the tactical functions and the added responsibilities that Treasury is taking on. But a very strategic objective and strategic initiative of Treasury is to partner with core functional groups across the organization to lever working capital effectively. And so, as a prime example, Treasury can partner in leading a procure to pay optimization effort aimed at driving value to the bottom line of the organization. And this, comes in the form of automating workflows and improving operational workflows in the payment execution and procure to pay ecosystem, accelerating technology adoption to do so, and then monetizing payments, bringing value back to the organization through levering rebate, through levering working capital. The issue is, in a typical organization, procure to pay touches anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 teams with vastly different objectives. So you think about the procure to pay life cycle. A sourcing team, which will typically sit within the house of supply chain, is worried about, identifying vendors, the best vendors, in purchasing the most widgets at the best price, right? Contracting typically sits within supply chain as well, but partners with legal, and the objectives are, legalese and making sure we're protecting ourselves from, negative punitive contract terms. You continue to move through the spectrum. Purchasing is all about supply and demand, requisition, POs, making sure that we're getting the inputs and the products to our team appropriately, as needed, when needed, on time. And then you start to talk about accounts payable, and it's all about invoice management and matching invoices to POs. It's about onboarding vendors, collecting their bank account data, getting their data into our systems, and creating supplier records in our systems. It's about payment execution, getting payments out on time. And this is where most AP teams are acutely focused is how do I get payments out on time so that we don't have credit holds? Um, you know, it's all about payment execution. And then you have finance and treasury, by the way, on the tail end doing reporting and reconciliation. So who owns
Right.
optimizing that ecosystem and that workflow, right? It's touching 3 or 4 teams that we just went through, all with vastly different objectives. Treasury could be the appropriate answer, right? In my opinion, probably in your opinion, Treasury is the answer. Um,
Great.
for organizations that have cracked the code, Treasury is sat in the middle of this, ecosystem of players with vastly different objectives. They've Treasury's locked these individuals in a room and developed a strategy to crack this code. You know, why is Treasury the perfect partner? We've talked about it. They sit in this central position of authority and influence and direction to lever this entire life cycle, not just the players within the 4 walls of our organization, but through our connections with banks and partners that could connect us to technology, solutions, systems that help us bring the pieces together.
Yeah, this is again, that's a very powerful concept. And as you were talking, I was thinking about ownership because you mentioned, and I agree that it is not so easy to find the appropriate owner when you are talking about cross-functional projects and improvements that are to be made. And perfect scenario when teams can work very well together and can be robust in distributing tasks and kind of figuring out the tactics because the strategy is again, it's not obvious, but even when the strategy is there and the company understands where it's headed with where this improvement actually lies, it's still not always easy to figure out the tactics, like who does what, so to speak. So yeah, it is critically important to be able to work together and find owners for appropriately kind of divided tasks. On this note, I'm also thinking back to technology and wanted to ask you a couple of things about your thoughts on technology as financial infrastructure. But before we even dive into this, just wanted to mention a few things about data. Recently, in many of the projects I'm involved in, we keep going back to this discussion as well. Who owns the data? So not only who owns this, because well, things are all interrelated. You own a process, and then what? How do you carry out this process? It's either through systems or manually, which is not ideal. So back to the systems. And if it's in a system, then it creates data, which is supposed to be stored somewhere. And then there's this question of ownership, because every time when you want to analyze something, again, to figure out how to improve things, how to adjust your strategy, maybe as you go along the project. So you want to rely on this data. And if it's not clearly kind of stored and owned and indexed and whatever, like data governance piece should be there. Like if this is not done from the beginning, it's even harder to, even when you have an owner of the process, of the piece of the process or the strategy, how do you get things done? So I'm very big advocate of go to the get to the very bottom of it. So go from the process to the system level to the data level, and only as long as you are sure you have an owner for all these system kind of driven pieces of the equation, then you're doing great with with actually putting together a roadmap for this improvement. So just a thought on data. Couldn't not mention this as we talk about the importance of technology and systems in our processes in Treasury. So Treasury technology, it used to mean systems for payments and cash visibility. Today, we're talking about integrations, data layers, as I just did, analytics, and AI, of course. In your opinion, how should Treasury leaders think about technology now, as tools they adopt or as infrastructure that help shape their strategy?
A really good question. Treasury technology has grown incredibly in sophistication in the last 10 years. You think about from a banking perspective with the banking portals, there has been this acceleration in investment dollars that the banks are putting into sustaining and growing their portals. There has been this introduction of Treasury Management System Light solutions, right? TMS Light solutions that are solving for very effectively solving for these kind of niche bespoke use cases oftentimes like cash forecasting or whatever the core function might be. And then there's been this rapid advancement in the full scale comprehensive TMS solutions to layer in technology and to achieve everything under the sun that we might need to in a modular approach for our corporate treasury team. I think, with that being said, there's a few key themes that have surfaced that I think we should all be mindful of. And the first is real time or right time data integrations have become so much more prevalent through the use of APIs and the ability to connect systems together, connect to our bank with a click to receive balance information or to transact payments. That's a huge theme that we've started to see, and it's a theme in the B2C space, very prevalent, but also in the B2B space. And so, if you think about real-time applications for some of these APIs and this new technology to enable real-time banking from a B2B perspective, it's payroll. If you know, Pizza Hut is paying employees biweekly traditionally, but Domino's across the street has this payroll on demand capability where you could say, I want to be paid real time after my shift. That is this technology finding its way into corporate treasury, right? And so, maybe that is more the B2B example. And then on the B2C side, you think about reimbursements or disbursements where companies need to get money to an individual quickly. There's been a rise in the like gambling applications, a DraftKings or a FanDuel. The competitive differentiator that one of them moved to was, well, when I want to cash out, I get my money immediately. You see Venmo doing the same thing, right? There's that ability to get your money faster, and it pays you real time with a real time payment on a different payment rail than we're used to, like in ACH, that would be a next day payment. And so that the first theme is this notion that this real time data integration it's happening in B2B and B2C use cases. The second theme that I've noticed and is really important to understand is data in the absence of analytics, insights, actionable recommendations. It's just that. It's just data. So collecting data, cleaning it, sanitizing it, normalizing it, and then summarizing it are tasks that could be performed in seconds now with the appropriate technology. You think about RPA, AI, there is technology that can do all those tasks to clean the data, summarize the data. And not just that, but taking it to the next level and leveraging these same technologies layered into our ERPs, our AR, our AP, our TMS systems to drive recommendations and insights. It's not just cleaning the data now, it's summarizing it and bringing you insights proactively. If you think about your systems and the architecture you have in place, if you haven't evaluated these technologies and layering these solutions into your core native systems, you need to have investigated this yesterday because the opportunity cost is high. And so that's the second thing I want to say. The third theme that I think is super important and should serve to motivate us all is this concept that you've talked about, Tanya. Data is so disparate and fragmented across the finance and treasury organization. And so you think about all the data sources that are so critical and important for a treasurer to make decisions. You have the ERP. You have sometimes a different AP or AR system. You have industry specific systems like an Epic or Cerner in the space that I work in heavily in healthcare. You have um, you know, banking data that comes from transactional and balance data on the banking side and in the banking portals. You have Excel spreadsheets and access databases. It's eye-opening how many organizations we step into where it's just Microsoft applications that are housing all the data. And all of that I just said is just quantitative. Think about all the qualitative pieces of data that sit in here, right? And it's a CFO, a treasurer, a VP of ARAP, a controller that holds the data and the decision making. And so, it's exponentially more critical now to consolidate and integrate these disparate data sources. Identifying the right technology solutions that pull together disparate data, bolstered by strong Treasury as a function, Treasury procedure that support this objective to advance us forward and make informed decisions with comprehensive data sets. So while the ERP or the TMS might be the primary and secondary sources of truth, this doesn't eliminate the mandate to explore other solutions and other pieces of technology that elevate and connect this ecosystem.
Yes, again, I already mentioned it, but this piece is so important. Cannot stress this enough. Also, sometimes banking transactions data and data that Treasury often relies on. Sometimes it is viewed internally as something external, like organizations have their ERP systems as their source of truth. There are data flows that go into the system, but sometimes treasury operations related kind of things they get, they are on the side somehow, and that's I think that's one of the problems that Treasury departments struggle with. That it is to convince internally that there is more to those data sets, that there are other sources that are not just a system that sits on the side and that's where we go and do our um, transactions, but it's also data storage that if it to be brought inside, so to speak, it can be a good source of additional insight into cash forecasting or whatever. But yeah, I think this not only fragmentation within organizations, but this back to the concept of owning data and who is to say that this data should also be part of our data warehouse, right? And again, it's these conversations that they can get so technical that maybe that's the part that many leaders are struggling with, because what is the depth that you should understand? And again, I think that with newer developments with AI and how we can request in human language to, for more insights now, it's very powerful. And maybe that's where the answer, sort of part of the answer is, if there is a good configuration and connection between what we ask AI to help us with and the actual underlying data and systems, then that's what could be so helpful, and that's how we can dive even deeper into deeper layers of insights. And we keep saying this, and yeah, if to simplify, and you mentioned, yeah, there are so many billing processes owned by APAR, and so and in Treasury, teams often think, okay, this is not the part of my process at all. Like I don't do AR, don't do AP, but hey, wouldn't you want to understand, let's say on the detailed level, like invoice level, the cost of payments, for example? Because why not? If because it boils down to transactions that generate overall flow of expenses and revenue. So why not get to the bottom of it and really detailed in the analytics? But it's not always easy to do, just because of how systems are interconnected and how data lives in those systems. So again, back to the data discussion as always. But I think it's so important for the teams to start owning the data that's related to their decision making process. So.
Right?
Well, great discussion. Well, let's talk about the future and designing the treasury of the future, so to speak. If a treasury leader were starting from scratch today, knowing everything that's changing, risk complexity, liquidity dynamics, treasury infrastructure, what would they design differently, in your opinion, about the structure or priorities of treasury?
Yeah. Um, Firstly, every single day you know, we interact with clients that span revenue size, employee size, geographic footprints, industries. Yet we find treasury as a function at every organization looks vastly different from one to the next. And so if I think about, if I'm the treasurer, how I would build, the organization of the future is it starts with structuring the team and the organization and resulting responsibilities, tactical and strategic, that got to come first to form this strong foundation. Because clearly identifying what is treasury and what our roles and responsibilities are is the first step to defining what follows. This human capital conversation, the people and the roles and responsibilities, the procedures, quickly blurs the line into technical architecture and what are the systems and partnerships, relationships that help us to support these objectives to do our job every single day. Um, and not only does the line get blurred with technology and technical architecture, but you start to blur the line with the functional structuring of the other teams that sit around treasury, right? What is our responsibility versus what is AP's responsibility? What is supply chain's responsibility? What is FP&A's responsibility? But it all starts with defining treasury. So, it becomes very imperative once we define that structure to have the treasury technology conversation because it helps to connect the different partners. It helps to connect the disparate pieces of data to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. Suffice it to say, people, processes, and technology are three critical levers to amplify the value of treasury as a function. If I'm thinking about building a treasury team for tomorrow, I'm defining the roles and responsibilities, properly resourcing the team, defining rules of the road as it relates to partnerships with these other functional groups, and then I'm layering in the technology to connect the data and connect the groups. People, processes, technology. It's this, triad of a successful treasury platform. And if a single prong in that triad is broken, it'll likely become symptomatic downstream in inefficiencies within your operations, misaligned functional objectives, functional partnerships, elevated costs, foregone value to be captured, manual operations, growing risk. That's all inherent in a broken piece of that trio. So it's super critical to get people, processes, and technology right, more so today than I think ever before.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for success for sure. Well, thank you, Justin. Now it's time for our rapid fire questions. What does an invention mindset mean to you?
It's a rapid fire, but I think a lot of my responses might be the
That's all right.
same length and depth. But I like this question. I had to think about this one because an invention mindset. I've always thought about, well, what's the difference between invention and innovation? And I think in order to kind of answer this, you got to define both. And so to me, invention is a net new idea or concept or product service. So I think about the clearinghouse developing the real-time payments rail. We've talked about that in some prior responses. And so to me, that is invention. While innovation is new application of an existing idea, concept, product, service. So innovation would be a first mover in leveraging this new payment rail of real-time payments with a novel use case to differentiate my business. And so both mindsets, in my opinion, are critical for the treasury professional today, as treasurers are facing off with banks and third parties, technology providers to solve very complex challenges every single day. And so often as a consultant, I stretch my brain and I aim to challenge myself to think about leveraging banking tools, disruptive technology solutions that have existed maybe for 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades, to apply them to a novel use case. And so, as a quick example, virtual accounts are a banking tool that have been used for the better part of the last 5 years or so to rationalize a physical account structure. So in my prior life, virtual accounts within this B2B use case as a bank salesperson connecting my clients to this product was all about, oh, you have, 8 business units under a single entity, you have 8 accounts today. You have the ability to lever, a single physical account with these 8 virtual accounts underneath it. That's kind of the traditional use case. But where, we've become more innovative in thinking about using this tool in the healthcare space today as a consultant is we've worked with a provider organization who has separate physical accounts to collect, payments from insurance payers. And so we have this just vast physical account structure to aid in accounting and reconciliation. So we know that commercial payer A is paying into account A, commercial payer B is paying into account B. But what about innovating a little and applying this virtual account concept for the first time with a very large banking institution to say we don't need all those physical accounts anymore? We could have a single physical DDA and we're unlimited in our ability to open virtual accounts underneath that physical DDA for every single insurance payer if we wanted to. And what we communicate to that insurance payer is the instructions for the virtual account that all sit underneath the one physical DDA. And that immediately reduces cost associated with all the tens of physical accounts that the provider maintains today. It improves reconciliation and streamlines the collection and ring fencing the collections for a given insurance payer to that virtual account. And so it solves all the challenges that the client was looking to solve for. They were doing it prior with physical accounts, but let's innovate and use this new tool that the banks are bringing, coupled with powerful ERP and technology architecture within this organization to bring this solution forward. And so while oftentimes as corporate treasury, we're innovators over inventors, I think it's important to, think about ourselves as both and think about how we can do both within the context of our day to day.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example. And I think one of the greatest takeaways from anyone from today's conversation, if nothing else, there's a great tip right there. And plus, I very much agree that invention, it doesn't have to be huge. And it very often is repurposing, so to speak, of certain tools to do something new that solve for a problem that existed forever, but no one ever thought, or no one ever got to use certain tools to solve certain things. So why not try it? Try it out and see if it works. And so that was a great example. Thank you for that. What do you think is missing in today's tech stack for finance and operations?
I think two main things are missing, and I've observed this with pretty high frequency. And the first is that we're missing tools that connect the fragmented, disparate pieces of data. We talked through data sits across all these teams, across all these systems, in people's heads and on hard drives, right? Connecting data is what's missing in a lot of tech stacks with the organizations that I see every single day. ERPs and TMS systems continue to advance in solving for this, but they're always missing pieces of data, sometimes qualitative, oftentimes qualitative. So this leads to decisions that are predicated on incomplete data sets or solely quantitative measures without that qualitative polishing that makes decision making in corporate treasury so impactful. And so that's the first thing. The second thing that I think is missing is insights that elevate the data. Humans are typically this engine, right? Humans, if we talked about though, are supposed to do more with less. And this is the conundrum that corporate treasury teams find themselves in. The integration of artificial intelligence and other tools that could be layered on top of our data sets and systems is missing in most organizations, yet it's becoming imperative. I mentioned it, the opportunity cost is high to ignore it. And you should have been researching these technologies yesterday if you are not already. Large language models, agentic AI, think about ChatGPT, RPAs. these are the solutions and tools that enable us to do exponentially more than we ever could today. You could try to work longer hours, work harder. These tools are just built to work faster, and these tools need prompting and appropriate engineering. But these are the tools that are missing. So I think that's the second thing, and that's the $1 million question that we've kind of talked through. How do we solve it? Is where and how do we layer and integrate these tools into our native architecture today? But those are the two things that I think are missing in a lot of organizations.
And they're very related, those two things as well, right? And I find in my team that I work with often kind of implementing tools to collect more data to allow AI to give more insight and more action items. And interestingly, very often I hear the phrase, we have to have this data somewhere. And again, back to your point that where is it? But yeah, sometimes it just seems that this data has to be there, but if it's not collected and not stored and not you don't have historical to rely on, then there's just not much you can do with well, nothing you can actually do if you don't store the data. So yes, that's critical. If you could improve one thing in a business, not necessarily tech related, what would it be?
This might be my favorite question, because to me it's leadership.
Mm.
And I'm extremely passionate about the power and value of strong leadership in teams and in an organization. When I was in college, I got a job because I just needed to pay for, food and stuff week to week. And so I got a job at the Illinois Leadership Center at the University of Illinois in Champaign. And what the Illinois Leadership Center was all about was building programming to support the growth of leadership skills of students on campus. And we would bring in, business leaders, CEOs, leaders in government to help lead these courses. And so I did it at the time to make a little bit more money. I didn't realize how important the things were that not only I was learning, but I was helping to like administer and facilitate, across a campus of 40,000 students. But I've realized now, retroactively looking back 10 years, leadership is something that permeates individuals. It breeds and cultivates culture, character, and vision, direction. It establishes the DNA of an organization and a team. And I think the strongest leaders that I've witnessed demonstrate consistently a lot of the same qualities. And, I would say, what are these qualities that epitomize strong leadership? It's humility, it's servant leadership. No job is too big or too small for me, irrespective of my title. It's integrity in the way that we do business, it's accountability and ownership, it's confidence. And don't mistake that with ego, but confidence, risk seeking, confidence in the decisions we're making, emotional intelligence, communication, strong communication skills, written, verbal, and being adaptable. And those are in no particular order, but those are kind of the themes that I've seen across strong leaders. And I aspire every single day to be one, but we all face this challenge and these pressures of, again, do more with less. We feel it at Kaufman Hall today, this pressure to scale, but you cannot compromise leadership and doing business the right way. It's so incredibly key. So to me, that is the one thing in a business that I think can always be improved. The needle can always be moved, and there's always more that we could do to demonstrate greater leadership.
And the leadership you just described could also, well, is also the key to this new AI era and the gaining competitive advantage in this regard as well, right? Because of how, agile you have to be now and how forward thinking. So it's great that, again, there are thought leaders that can give such great advice as you did today. Thank you, Justin, for today's conversation. I think there were so many great takeaways from it, and thanks to a lot of food for thought there for sure. So thank you for joining today's episode. It was really insightful and great to have you. Thank you.
It was great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Treasury used to sit mainly around liquidity and control, but our conversation today really confirms something I'm seeing across many organizations. The Treasury now touches something much broader. It connects risk management, banking relationships, working capital, and the technology that ties all of those pieces together. In many ways, Treasury is becoming the place where the financial system of the company comes together. And the opportunity for leaders now is to design that system intentionally instead of letting it evolve by accident. Thanks everyone for listening to this episode. Please subscribe, leave your feedback and reviews. Share your story of invention with me on LinkedIn.